So good morning to everybody and a very warm welcome. We are so pleased this morning to welcome Dr. Jose La Peña. Dr. La Peña is an international leader in peer review and publishing, and he's serving as secretary of the World Association of Medical Editors. He has been on the editorial board of 7 journals that have spanned the globe. He's also been the editor-in-chief of the Philippine Journal of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, and the international corresponding editor for the Singapore Medical Journal. He's also been charter president of the Asia Pacific Association of Medical Editors, and he served for over a decade on the editorial boards of our Academy's journals. Dr. La Peña was actually dubbed the world's busiest editor and reviewer in a 2016 article that was devoted to featuring him. And this was based not just on his capacity to handle a large volume of manuscripts, but also to really handle them very well. And so perhaps not surprisingly, given Dr. La Peña's international reach this morning, he's bringing together multiple groups today. First, I want to give a very warm welcome to all of our international attendees. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on the time of day and your time zone. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here to join us this morning. And this includes our matriculants and mentors in our residency reviewer development program. We're also very pleased to welcome those who are attending through the Office for Professional Development and from Harvard and Mass General Brigham this morning. For those of you who are from Boston, we'll be showing a CME link so that you can obtain local CME credit. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Joey La Peña. We really look forward to your thoughts this morning.
Dr. La Peña, you're muted. Could you unmute yourself?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
So good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I just need to share my slides now. There you go. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so this is the link for those from Harvard and Mass Gen. Okay.
Got it.
And this was my original focusing slide, but it's no longer the focusing slide. I wanted to pay tribute to our youngest colleagues in the fight against COVID-19. These are the newly licensed physicians from our institution. And they're now PGY 1 residents in, or 2 residents in different specialties. This is my topic, which you've read about already in the invitations. And here are my disclosures, which will be available if you're interested. I bring greetings from WAMI, and I have permission from those in the photo to share this screenshot from a recent meeting that we had. WAMI represents over 1,800 editors in 1,000 journals from 92 countries. And it aims to facilitate worldwide cooperation and communication among editors of peer-reviewed medical journals, improve editorial standards, promote professionalism in medical editing through education, self-criticism, and self-regulation, and encourage research on the principles and practice of medical editing. Little known to many, we are represented in the International Committee on Medical Journal Editors, as well as in the International Peer Review Congress, and we represent journals whose editors belong to WAMI. We have meetings and conferences and issue policy statements. Tonight, we will be quoting from our policy on predatory and pseudo journals. And we also develop resources, and forthcoming, which may interest you, we have an e-learning program for editors that will be available through WAMI. So without further ado, tonight we will compare and contrast individualistic and collective cultural contexts, apply these contextual perspectives to current and evolving issues in publishing and peer review, focusing on these specific issues, and learn how to avoid predatory and pseudo journals and publishers. Much of what has been written on publishing and peer review reflects a predominantly, for want of a better term, individualistic or Western, rather than a collective or Eastern cultural perspective. And with apologies to Kipling, the twain do meet. The differences in these perspectives are really a matter of degree and may be viewed as points along a continuum rather than a black and white dichotomy. Allow me to present my analysis of these contexts. Beginning with the concept of ultimate reality and space relations, the Judeo-Christian personifications, for example, are in stark contrast to Eastern Hindu concepts of Brahman or the Chinese Tao or the Buddhist Enlightenment, so that the personal anthropomorphic idea gives way to a transpersonal being. Similarly, individuals are not really separate as drops of water would be, but are like a drop of water in all water. Namely, they are connected as one. In terms of time orientation, the usual greeting in many individualist cultures is, "What's up? How's it going? Where are you headed?" Compared to our, "Where have you been? Where did you come from? How have you been?" This reflects time orientation as being past rather than future oriented, and in an extension of that, being journey oriented rather than destination oriented. So the focus is more on process rather than program. Relations with nature are quite interesting. Dominion over nature is reflected in typical portraits that come out of individualistic cultures. The example of the Mona Lisa dominating the entire frame. And if you peer carefully into the background, you will see the landscape in miniature versus a traditional Eastern landscape where you have to peer closely through the trees maybe or beside the lake to see little people drawn in perspective in relation to the bigger scenery around them. In terms of this dominion, the individualistic cultures will blast mountains to build roads and tunnels or plow fields in a straight line. Compare this to our winding rice terraces that follow the slope and contour of the mountain of the territory. One of my favorite experiences is walking down a corridor or stairwell in university where a visitor from an individualistic culture might actually ask people to move out of the way, please, asserting their right of way, whereas we would apologetically weave in and out, excuse me, pardon me, because the people who are sitting in the stairwells do have the right to sit there as well. And this reflects the thought process in these cultures, which on one hand is linear, past, present, future, from here to there, because maybe you're thinking in terms of having one life to live compared to a cyclic uh, point of view or perspective that what goes up must come down. If you're up there, do not be too happy because tomorrow you may fall into misfortune. And if you're down In the bottom, don't be too sad because tomorrow you may go up. So this whole cycle of life is probably more connected to the concept of reincarnation rather than a singular linear life. In terms of the concept of self, the individualistic culture will look at the self as separate and unique, me, myself, and I versus you, whereas a collective cultural context regards the self as a unified we, intertwined, me and us. This is very much reflected in the manner by which we introduce ourselves or are named. Traditionally, in the Western or individualistic culture, the first name comes first, followed by the affiliation. So I'm Joey La Peña from the University of the Philippines. But the exact opposite is seen in traditional Eastern or collective cultures, where I would be introduced as La Peña Joey, or even more properly, from the Philippines, from the University of the Philippines, La Peña Joey. In terms of a concept of truth, truth is what conforms to objective reality in individualistic contexts, but from the collective perspective, it is what considers the feelings of everyone concerned. So that somebody from an individualistic context might be regarded as being brutally frank, whereas somebody from a collective context might be accused of being shifty eyed and evasive, when in fact, they are simply avoiding direct eye contact as a sign of respect or deference or humility, which may be misinterpreted as an inability to look me in the eye. In terms of social structure, the individualistic culture is more horizontal and democratic. This is typified by the possibility of calling others, including your elders, by their first name. And this is unheard of in the more vertical authoritarian collective culture, where titles of respect denoting rank and position are held even among siblings. So, in a family, for example, eldest brother and eldest sister have a title, and second brother and second sister have a title as well, and so on down the line. Reputation is what you make of yourself. You are what you make of yourself, and what you achieve is your reputation in individualistic cultures, but not so all the time in collective cultures, where your reputation is bestowed upon you and ascribed to you by precedence and even by birthright. Little wonder that in individualistic cultures, there is a relentless pursuit of the fountain of youth, products and cosmetics and procedures to stay young so that you can continue achieving and pursuing your dreams, compared to collective cultures where there is a reverence for age. That by virtue of having survived another year, just by having gone ahead or having been there before. So, how do these apply to research? In terms of the reasoning process, individualistic cultures will value objective and rational thinking, linear and causal relations, and black and white um, facts and figures, whereas collective cultures may be more open to subjective and intuitive processes, as well as circuitous and inferential um, conclusions, and there's a lot more possibility for shades of gray. In terms of reference, citation, attribution, and appropriation, and even plagiarism, things are more black and white in cultures where separatedness defines boundaries, where there are differences and distinctions between what is yours and what is mine. But what about cultures where things are held more in common and connectedness blurs boundaries? In cultures where euplexis actually treats even ideas as ours. In terms of authorship, it is easy to see how individualistic cultures will name or list authors separately as unique and individual over group priority, sees no problem with younger or so-called less senior people taking credit and even being named as author, and conversely excluding more senior authors. But in collective cultures where people are more intertwined, the seniority and precedence taken by that may actually give rise to more tolerance of things like gift authorship. In an individualistic culture, this will be a no-no. I did it on my own, and so um, I earned this authorship. But from the collective perspective, you might have somebody argue, what would I be without my mentor? I would not be where I am, and therefore anything I create or anything I offer includes the person who made me who I am, and I bestow and include that person in the authorship. In terms of review and editing processes, the individualistic culture may actually favor preprints as an assertion of primacy, a bold assertion even. And this is part of the entire program of getting my research published, whereas a collective cultural context might make a person take a more cautious traditional route, going through due process before considering making results public. In terms of reviewing papers, there's no problem with limiting reviews to the individual in an individualistic culture, but I have encountered people who saw nothing wrong with consulting others about reviews that they were making because they did not consider this a breach of confidentiality in collective cultures. Comments, corrections, and clarifications are certainly more direct to the point, blunt, or even brutally frank because they conform to objective reality and therefore are quite different in a collective culture where the feelings of everyone concerned makes reviews, especially if they are open, circuitous, and beat around the bush and evasive, therefore favoring a double-blind review because it will be very difficult for a junior to review a senior in the open. Not so in individualistic cultures where open review is taking root quite quickly. So we move on to open access, which I was asked to speak about because it is another important issue that is current as well. And if we look at the Budapest Open Access Initiative definition, we're looking at free availability on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to full texts, as well as scroll them for indexing, pass them on to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose. With certain stipulations, the only constraint being that authors have complete control over the integrity of their work and the right to be properly acknowledged and cited. And for this part, I would like to acknowledge the Access to Health Research Working Group of HIFA, which I also belong to. And we actually have summarized the Budapest Initiative in under 3 main points. Open access is first free, gratis, meaning it is free to read. 2, it has reuse rights. Libre, it is free to reuse. The knowledge can be used, modified, and shared. And third, that copyright should give authors control over their work. And there's a whole range of Creative Commons licenses that can be applied, ranging from the most stringent to the most open, or vice versa, from the most open to the most stringent. Of late, the Plan S initiative has been in the news and certainly been discussed at length by all, if not most, journals, editors, and publishers. This initiative for open access was launched in 2018, and it requires that beginning this year, quote, all scholarly publications on the results from research funded by public or private grants provided by national, regional, and international research councils and funding bodies must be published in open access journals, on open access platforms, or made immediately available through open access repositories without embargo. And an example of a platform or a listing of these journals is the DOAJ. So here is a list of the Plan S principles and the 10 points under it. When you talk about open access, you have to recall that it all began with the JISC Romeo Color Code that stipulated gold open access as a publishing color and green open access as an archiving color as the best types of open access. So in a sense, you're looking at a combination of green and gold as the best type of open access. Plan S does not allow hybrid open access, or at least only allows it in transition, but it eventually is something that will be phased out. And so as an author, you consider which route you would take, whether to go through publishing in an open access journal and paying, or having your institution or research sponsor pay for the article processing charge, or whether you publish in a subscription-based journal and self-archive in a repository. But whatever the route, this escalation in open access publishing may have fueled an exponential rise in the number of predatory journals and publishers, which brings us to the other topic for tonight, which are predatory journals or pseudo journals and publishers, a term that was first applied by Jeffrey Beal to potential, possible, or probable predatory journals and publishers. And the word predatory actually means this. It's actually a very negative word, and it does apply to or refer to fake or scam journals and publishers who send phishing emails promising quick review and open access publication in exchange for fees without robust editorial or publishing services. The main motivation is financial gain. Here's an example of a typical predatory spam mail. Note that my name and address of the addressee is correct, but my discipline is wrong. I am not an ophthalmologist, and the discipline is unrelated to the journal field, which is clinical and experimental dermatology. The other giveaways are the promise to finish the review process quickly and the multiple grammatical errors. Unfortunately, many young or inexperienced authors, especially from low and middle income countries, are easily swayed by cheap flattery such as, "We have been through your researches and enthralled to know about your reputation and commitment," usually from a UK or US address. Here's another example, even worse, from the Journal of Pregnancy and Child Health, because I am not an obstetrician. Predatory journals and publishers are not a good idea because the promised articles may never be published, or published with such poor quality or accessibility that any research is effectively lost. I have known of many authors who, after mistakenly submitting or initially submitting their work, futilely try to withdraw their articles. And unfortunately for them, these articles may even end up being published in raw form with all the errors of a draft, and unfortunately will preclude them from publishing elsewhere because this still constitutes or will constitute a duplicate publication. A recent article on predatory publishing in Scopus is very interesting and informative. It actually shows us on this world map the darker colored countries are those with a higher national propensity to publish in predatory journals. The darkest areas are concentrated in Asia and North Africa. Note that Europe, North and South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa are paler. But generally, most and least developed countries are both relatively less affected, while developing countries with emerging research systems, except those in South America, appear to be most in harm's way. Here is a table of the top and bottom 20 countries. On the left, the top 20, with Kazakhstan and Indonesia appearing most dire, where roughly every sixth article is predatory, followed by Iraq, Albania, and Malaysia, where every 10th article appears in predatory journals. Some of the most severely affected countries are also among the most populous: Indonesia, Nigeria, the Philippines, and Egypt. And this underlies the gravity of the problem. And all the countries in the top 20 list, except only Albania, are indeed in or very near Asia and North Africa. Surprisingly, on the right side, the opposite end of the spectrum, with the lowest penetration of predatory journal articles, is also dominated by developing countries, including some of even the least developed. In several, for example, Bhutan, Chad, and North Korea, there are no authors published in predatory journals whatsoever. But this rather diverse group of countries scattered across continents have one additional feature in common. Most are small countries with underdeveloped research systems. The top 20 most affected countries and averages across all countries by field of research shows a worldwide propensity to publish in predatory journals is almost 2 times higher in the social and life sciences than in health and physical sciences. Social sciences are particularly ravaged by this problem. And you can see that the credibility of the whole field is at stake here, or seems to be. Here you have Indonesia, Iraq, and Oman in the top 20 lists in all 4 fields: health, life sciences, physical sciences, and social sciences. Egypt, Iran, Kazakhstan, Libya, Malaysia, Nigeria, Palestine, Sudan, and Yemen each are found in 3 lists. And in these countries, predatory publication practices have apparently become a systemic problem at the national level, not limited to particular clusters. On the contrary, and perhaps more interestingly, there are countries in which only specific fields went rogue, but it does not appear on any other field list. Albania stands out in social sciences only, and the Philippines appears in physical sciences only, where it ranks third. So, identifying or even how do we avoid predatory journals? The first step is to check if the journal or publisher that you are considering was ever listed on Beals' list. Beals' list is now defunct, but it is still available at these sites, and it continues to be updated by others. It tends to be reflective of Beals' bias, though, making it a marker for under-resourced journals as well, rather than being specific for predatory journals. So you have to understand that not every journal listed on Beals' list is automatically predatory. The second point is to check if the journal is open access, to check if it is listed on DOAJ. And this is the site that you can actually access. And here is a screenshot of DOAJ, which in opposition to the defunct Beals list may be regarded as a sort of whitelist that attempts to vet the open access journals on its list so that they are supposedly reputable journals. The third step is to check if the journal is indexed in reputable databases and if the publisher is a member of COPE, STM, OWASPA, IMAME, APAME, or other organizations, and whether it upholds guidelines and policies of WAMI, ICMJE, and the Council of Science Editors. Don't take the journal's word for it. Check the individual websites. And if you are in a certain country doing research, for example, then you should also check whether there is a national database in the Philippines. We have Herdin Plus. Check also if there is a regional database. So we do have an ASEAN citation index, which includes supposedly reputable or vetted articles and journals from the member countries of ASEAN. You can also look at a regional database. These are the 5 regional indexes Medici of the Global Index Medicus of WHO. So you have the African Index Medicus, the Index Medicus for the Eastern Mediterranean region, that for the Southeast Asia region, for the Caribbean and Latin American region, and the Western Pacific region, which we belong to in the Philippines. This is the Global Index Medicus of WHO. Here is the website of WAMI, and this is a screenshot of the list that WAMI publishes of journals whose editors belong to WAMI. It lists those journals, but the journals themselves are not members, and WAMI does not index journals. Here's a screenshot of the ICMJE website, and ICMJE also lists journals that claim to follow ICMJE recommendations without actually attesting that they do. Finally, think, check, and submit. And think, check, and submit is available at this site. And when you submit to a journal on Think, Check, Submit, you go through these steps. And it includes such a checklist. Do you or your colleagues know about the journal? Have you read any articles on it before? Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? Are the phone, email, and postal addresses bogus or real? Is the type of peer review that the journal uses clear? Are there any fees, and are they upfront? Do you recognize the editorial board? In a specialty journal, you certainly should be familiar with at least some of the names on the board or be able to search them. And is the publisher a member of or supportive of any of these? Here's an example of a predatory journal editor-in-chief who had been murdered before this listing. So they actually listed somebody who had been murdered as editor-in-chief. This is a screenshot of a modification of the WAMI Predatory Journal's algorithm, and it summarizes at the top, checking whether the journal was ever on Beals list and whether if the journal is open access on DOAJ, and then further going through Think, Check, and Submit to look for warning signs about the possibility of the journal being predatory. Here is an article, one of several, which tries to list salient characteristics of potential predatory journals, and other salient characteristics have been proposed, such as found on this list, and a new cabals list has been created, replacing supposedly Beals list, but it is not available for free, and these all have to be carefully considered insofar as they tag under-resourced journals rather than true predatory journals. For example, characteristics listed here, such as submission via email and the use of non-professional email addresses, are examples that may actually discriminate against situations constraining several low and middle income country journals than being signs of a predatory journal. Finally, we look at journal and article metrics, impact factor and impact. And the question is, should you choose a journal based on impact factor? And when you think of impact factor, the Web of Science has journal citation reports which have now redefined and updated not only the impact factor, but expanded that to include an eigenfactor and other metrics. And the other available package is that of Scopus, that has its own metrics from CiteScore to SciMago journal rankings and so on. But these metrics are fraught with issues and problems, and to go into them in detail will be like entering a rabbit hole. So I would like to bring your attention back to the question of why research and why publish. Why do you perform research and why do you publish in the first place? Because if we all chase impact factors, how will we make an impact? And hopefully at the end of the day, the reason why we research and publish is to achieve real impact and not just impact factor as we advance free and open access to health information and publication that improves global health-related quality of life for all. Thank you very much. This is a screenshot of my university at night. It is evening here, and I thank you for your kind attention. I'll be happy to take whatever questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. LaPena. That was great. Really appreciate your insights. It's great to see you this morning and hear the different, especially the international flavor, really, of looking at the different aspects of publishing. It really broadens our horizons, especially for us here in the US, thinking about the different cultural aspects. It's really fantastic that we presented the two different sides of it. And then I think the open access component of it was also extremely informative, especially, again, thinking about many of our different authors from so many different countries and our young people who are joining us today to understand the different components, everything from Plan S to looking at the nitty-gritty of very specific emails that you might get. So very much appreciate your talk.